How sweet the sound that saved a wretch like me.
We're going to look at Ruth chapter 3, and we're going to be just cooking with gas on the front burner, as my high school biology teacher would say. We've got a lot of ground to cover. I might summarize some things. I'll read the text. As always, feel free to stop me if you have any questions. But we're going to travel through this. Now, I want to situate the text of what we studied so far. We went very slowly and very methodically through chapters 1 and 2 of the Book of Ruth. And so one of the things that we talked about were major themes that were present in the Book of Ruth. We also discussed the significance of names in the Book of Ruth, that everything means something. And we also talked about God's sovereignty even when there's pain in people's lives. So this book started in a very dark and bleak way. Naomi and her husband Elimelech went down with their 2 sons from Israel to Moab, arguably leaving the covenant community of God, maybe even leaving their faith. And they went there because there was a severe famine in the land of Israel. Not only that, but this is during the time of the Judges. It was a very dark time in the Israelite history because no one really did what was right in terms of the law. Everyone did right, according to the book of Judges, in their own eyes. And so once the famine is done, they go back into the land of Israel because now Naomi, who's the main character in the first chapter at least, says, hey, look, there's no more famine. Let's get back to where there is food because I no longer have a husband. He died. And I no longer have my 2 sons. They also died. And so Orpah leaves. She stays in Moab. But Ruth, through this great proclamation of faith, says, Naomi, I'm not going to let you go. Your people will be my people and your God, my God. Never forget that. It's almost as if she's embracing the God of Israel. She's embracing Yahweh as she says this. And so it's with great faith that they travel back into Israel. Now remember, because everyone's doing what's right in their own eyes, it is still a question mark in the mind of Naomi whether the people during harvest time are going to follow the law. And if you remember, the law was that you were to leave the edges of your field for the poor, for the orphan, for the widow, and for the alien. That was the idea, that it was just that the people who owned the field could harvest, but it was for the poor and the marginalized that they were to glean. And Ruth just so happens to go to the field of Boaz. And I say that sort of almost sarcastically and facetiously because we know that there's no doctrine of coincidence in the life of the Christian. There's only the doctrine of providence, that God provides. And she comes to Boaz's house. Remember, he is a kinsman redeemer, the Hebrew goel. He's someone whose obligation it is to redeem the family by helping, and this is kind of an odd concept, helping procreate so that the line of the person who was dead doesn't pass away. Now, this might be an odd notion, but let me put it like this, okay? So let's say that that Sarah has a sister, right, Leah, and let's say that her husband died, and we're living 4,000 years ago in the time of Ruth. She has no social net. She has no ability to make money for herself. All she is a poor, marginalized widow. And so my obligation as someone in the family would be to not marry Leah necessarily, but to procreate with her. Now, to us, that notion is so foreign. It's sort of like, and you're even chuckling, right? This is Sarah's aunt, because that just would seem so foreign to us. But that's the concept of levirate marriage. We'll get into it a little bit more later. But the reason why I want to set the stage like that is because the first couple verses of chapter 3 are going to sound like, wait, what's going on? Like, am I reading like one of those dime store novels with the guy with like the hulking chest on the front, where, he's going to try to sleep with a, woman who's scantily clad? It might seem like that, but I want to try to present that, what we're reading instead is deeply embedded in the culture, and so we kind of have to work as 21st century Western Americans to try to understand this. So let's read in Ruth chapter 3, starting at verse 1. Then Naomi, her mother-in-law, said to her, that's Ruth, "My daughter, should I not seek rest for you that it may be well with you?" Okay, so in other words, hey, I want to make sure that you're set up. Yes, you've gotten a ton of barley and wheat from the barley and wheat harvest. Yes, it's over and above what we ever thought, but I want to make sure you're set up long term. So verse 2, "Is not Boaz our relative, with whose young women you were? See, he is winnowing the barley tonight at the threshing floor. Wash therefore and anoint yourself, put on your cloak and go down to the threshing floor, but do not make yourself known to the man until he's finished eating and drinking. But when he lies down, observe the place where he lies, and then go and uncover his feet and lie down, and he will tell you what to do." And she replied, "All that you say, I will do." So the first couple of verses, it's like, oh, that makes sense. Ruth is trying to make it very apparent to Boaz that she's available, right? Like she's not married anymore. Her husband died. She's available to court and eventually marry. But then, there's this verse 4 where it's like, go and uncover his feet. Well, is this what I think it is? Uncovering the feet. Let's see. Oh, there we go. Uncovering the feet, and later on we'll talk about spreading garments. It can mean sexual. It can have sexual connotations. The reference that I have up here, Ezekiel 16:8. In that instance, it can mean, almost like, hey, I'm going to uncover your nakedness so that we can procreate. It can mean that. But I don't think that that's necessarily and always what's in view here. Now, there's a lot of scholars, and I debated throughout the week because I read widely in different commentaries to try to understand exactly what's going on here. But, there's all kinds of euphemisms throughout the Old Testament. The Old Testament's not direct. Have you ever read, in a genealogy or in a portion where they're talking about who beget who, and so knew his wife, and they bore a son. Knowing there doesn't mean like, oh, I know you. Knowing has a completely different connotation. They made babies. You know what I'm saying? So, and by the way, we're going to have this conversation. So, if I'm going to put myself out there, you have to too. You have to laugh at my dumb jokes. Sorry. Yeah, I know. Phil, you're in here. Phil, no kids. Shoo. Sorry. I love you. I'm just kidding. All right. So here's the deal, though. Knowing can mean that. Also, and I say this to also help you understand Old Testament culture. I'm not saying this just for shock value. Okay. In the Old Testament, when you wanted to make a covenant with someone, you could do that a variety of ways. You could do it with a blood covenant, which is a hugely big ordeal, or you could go in and if you read in the Old Testament, so for instance, when Jacob is about to die and he wants his sons to come in and to carry out his wishes. So he's renamed by this time Israel. He wants his sons to carry out his wishes, and it talks about how they touched his thigh, right? And they say, I will do that. They ain't touching his thigh, friends. Covenant is another word for testament, and testament is etymologically related to testicle. So the idea was, I'm going to touch your most vulnerable parts, not in a sexual way, but I'm going to touch your most vulnerable parts so that I'm serious. Does that make sense? You'll take my word. Yeah, thank you. Hey, that's fine. Yeah, exactly. No one wants to do covenants that way. We do covenants with pens now. I'm happy about that. But the reason why I say that is because it hopefully makes a little bit more sense with like the gravity of the situation. By the way, if you make a covenant today, like for instance, like we bought a little condo several years back at the bottom of the market, best time to buy. We're so grateful for that. And there were like you don't buy a house and you're just sort of like, well, if it doesn't work out, then we both go our separate ways. Like you have to sign thing after thing after thing because they want you to know the gravity of what you're doing. It's the same with the Old Testament. So what's going on here? Is Ruth being provocative sexually? And what will Boaz do? I mean, regardless of the fact if this is sexual or not, Ruth has put herself in a position, possibly, to be compromising sexually, or at least to soil her reputation, right? She's there, alone, at night, after he has been working hard through the harvest, and quote, he's merry and he's had, food and drink. He's good. So what's going to happen? What's going to take place? And by the way, just as a side note, I side with several scholars who believe that what's in view here, and again, you can have a different view, that's fine, but that what's in view here is that Ruth is lifting up the sheets almost as it were to have the breeze almost go on his feet so that he kind of wakes up and he's startled, so that she can present herself after having taken a bath and anointed herself with oils and smelling good and looking good and putting on, her best dress. She probably didn't wear a dress, but her, her Sunday best, so to speak. She's presenting herself and saying, I'm available. You're a kinsman redeemer. We both know it. Let's go forward with this. But what will Boaz do? What I want you to notice here is his response, right? So verse 6. So she went down to the threshing floor and did just as her mother-in-law had commanded her. And when Boaz had eaten and was drunk and his heart was merry, he went down to lie at the end of the heap of grain. And why would he do this? Well, partially because they had just harvested all this grain, and if someone were to come steal it, the guys were there, right? Then she came softly and she uncovered his feet and lay down. At midnight, the man was startled and turned over, and behold, a woman lay at his feet. I love the way that's like that's stated. It's like, whoa, hey, there's a beautiful woman right here. My goodness. He said, who are you? And she answered, I am Ruth, your servant. Spread your wings over your servant, for you are a redeemer. Again, this could possibly mean a sexual advance, but it doesn't necessarily have to. Because to spread the wings of your garment could mean almost like, think of like a mother bird spreading her wings over her little ducklings or her little, whatever kind of bird that, they're protected away from being exposed. They're taken care of. That's possibly what's in view here. But what I want you to focus on is less so much what Ruth does and more so on what Boaz does, because Boaz is a man of incredible integrity. So he says in verse 10, May you be blessed by the Lord. Notice, how's Lord spelled? Yes, capital L, capital O, capital R, capital D. That's the covenant name of Yahweh. You invoke that when you're serious, right? My daughter, he says. This is a really interesting thing. Now, think about this. If this is a sexual advance, then that would probably, ruin the mood, right? I'm not trying to be gross here, okay? Listen, help me out. It wouldn't necessarily be like the most provocative thing to say back to her. Likely what he sees is, this is a proposal possibly of marriage, and I want to pump the brakes a little bit, okay? Because he has this to say, you have made this last kindness greater than the first, in that you have not gone after young men, whether rich or poor. Okay, so what's likely going on here is that Ruth is a young and arguably very beautiful woman. Boaz is probably an older, more established man. And so what would have been the temptation is for her to, make herself known to another eligible bachelor, not Boaz necessarily. But because Boaz knows that Ruth is a woman of profound faith, after all, she's the one who said to Naomi, your people will be my people, your God will be my God. And because Ruth knows that Boaz is a man of incredible integrity and generosity, she has made herself known to Boaz. And so he says, and now my daughter, do not fear. I will do, this is in verse 11, I will do for you all that you ask, and my fellow townsmen, they know that you are a worthy woman. And now it is true that I am a redeemer, yet there is a redeemer nearer than I. Remain tonight, and in the morning, if he will redeem you, good. Let him do it. But if he will not be willing to redeem you, then as the Lord lives, I will redeem you. Lie down until the morning. So as she lay at his feet until the morning, so she lay at her feet until the morning, but she arose before one could recognize another. And he said, let it not be known that the woman came to the threshing floor. And then verse 15, bring the garment you were wearing and hold it out, he says. So she held it, and he measured out 6 measures of barley and put it on her. In other words, it's possible that it was almost like a garment that could carry things, right? maybe something with a hood in the back. And in verse 16, and when she came to her mother-in-law, she said, "How did you fare, my daughter?" And then she told her all that the man had done for her, saying, "These 6 measures of barley he gave to me, for he said to me, 'You must not go back empty-handed to your mother-in-law.'" She replied, "Wait, my daughter, until you learn how the matter turns out, for the man will not rest, but will settle the matter today." So we're gonna read on, but I want to try to develop for you the importance of levirate marriage. Now, in the middle of levirate, or at the beginning rather, you see the word Levi, right? Levi, or like the book of Leviticus, was written to give the law. Does that make sense? So the law was written, not written by, but the law was carried out partially by the people who officiated certain things in the temple. And ideally, the children of Israel would follow it. Do they always follow it throughout redemptive history? No. God's people rarely do it perfectly. In fact, they almost never do it perfectly. However, the idea was that women would not be destitute. And so I just want to read to you the law for levirate marriage that's most closely, or that most clearly rather illustrates what it is. And to do that, we're going to go to Deuteronomy. Why, you might ask? Why wouldn't we go to Leviticus? Well, partially because Deuteronomy is much clearer, because Deuteronomy means second law. Okay, Deuteros means second, and nomos means law. And that doesn't mean that it's a second law like there's a first law and the second law. It means rather that it's a recapitulation of the law. Or in other words, this is the summation of the law, or this is the most important part of the law. And it's a lot more relatable to us Westerners. So if you're ever scared off by the law, and you ever get lost in Leviticus, Numbers, go to Deuteronomy. It's really, really clear, and it's also a really compelling book. So let's look specifically at verse 5 of chapter 25. Okay, so Deuteronomy, it's on the screen, Deuteronomy 25, 5 through 10. And I'll go ahead and read it for us. "If brothers dwell together, and one of them dies and has no son, the wife of the dead man shall not be married outside the family to a stranger. Her husband's brother shall go into her and take her as his wife and perform the duty of a husband's brother to her. And the first son whom she bears shall succeed to the name of the dead brother, so that his name may not be blotted out of Israel." Now, what's the intent of the law behind this? Is it just sexual, so that men can continue to have sex? No, that's not it, right? Is it procreation? What is it? He asked non-rhetorically. What's the intent of the law here? Yes, to keep the family alive, to perpetuate the trade. I'm sorry? Exactly. The land is theirs, absolutely. So anyone else? It's also to care for the most vulnerable in the community. So see the intent behind the law. Now, as a side note, many of us on this side of redemptive history, that is, in the year 0, we know it probably wasn't 0, Jesus is born, and then in the year 33, and we know it's probably not 33, he died. So anything past that point, we have the luxury of having to view redemptive history through the lens of Jesus. And thank God for that, I'm so glad. But what we mistakenly do sometimes is we're critical of the Old Testament law in thinking that it's all rules. And it's all just stuff, and that stuff doesn't matter anyways because now we have grace, right? And they misquote verses from the Gospel of John which say, for the law came through Moses, but grace and peace come through Jesus Christ, as if the law is something bad. But I want to make the argument, along with several other scholars, that the law is a beautiful thing. And get this, the law was given not so that God could tell the children of Israel, who are now free from Egypt, if you do this, I'll free you. No. The law was given to a free people. He says, you're already free, now act like it. Here's the law. So it wasn't, hey, earn your salvation, earn your love from me. It was instead, hey, you already have it, now here's how to live it. And if you can read and understand the intent of the law that way, boy, it sure clears a lot of stuff up. Because what this does is it allows the most vulnerable of the population not to be completely destitute. Because now they would have a son that could take care of them. Are you tracking? Okay, that was unconvincing. I'm sorry, I'm not trying to be a jerk here. Does it make sense? Okay, if it doesn't, you got to stop me because this is really important. Okay, so let's read on. In verse 7, and if the man does not wish to take up his brother's wife, then his brother's wife shall go up to the gate of the elders and say, my husband's brother refuses to perpetuate his brother's name in Israel. He will not perform the duty of a husband's brother to me. Then the elders of the city shall call him and speak to him, and if he persists, saying, I do not wish to take her, then his brother's wife, get this, ready? His brother's wife shall go up in the presence of the elders, pull his sandal off his foot, and spit in his face. And she shall say, so shall it be done to the man who does not build up his brother's house. And the name of the house shall be called in Israel, the house of him who has his sandal pulled off. Like, can we just take a break here and acknowledge this is a little strange for us? I mean, I think it's okay for us to acknowledge, like, this is a little foreign. Doesn't mean it's bad or weird. It just means, like, I'm not used to this, right? Because if someone said, oh, you had your sandal pulled off, Michael, I'd be like, huh? But, like, evidently, it was, like, a really big deal. You know, you did not want your sandal to be pulled off back in the day. But here's the thing. I'm actually going to go back now to a story that might make you blush, okay? And this is an important story, and I don't say these things for shock value. Hopefully you know me enough to know I'm not trying to just say these things, but I want you to understand the intent of the law. Go to Genesis 38, please. Genesis 38. If you're at all familiar with the book of Genesis, by this point in the book of Genesis, you've already had Abraham, you've already had Isaac, you've already had Jacob, you've already had the 12 sons, but then you have this one special son who has dreams. That guy's name is Joseph. And of course, Joseph's this compelling character. Everything wrong happens to him, and yet he finds God's favor in the middle of adversity, right? After a long time of being lost. And then there's this break in the story where Judah goes and sleeps with a prostitute who turns out to be his daughter-in-law who tricked him into this. It's like, what in the world is going on? And then it goes right back to Joseph. What in the world is going on? Let's read it. I want to even heighten the tension even more. Everyone in Genesis 38? Yeah. Thank you for the one person. Genesis, if you don't know, is at the beginning of the Bible. For me, it's on page 40. For you, it might not be. All right, let's read it. Genesis 38. I'm taking notes. That joke that I just gave, I'm not going to incorporate in my next sermon. All right. Verse 1 of 38. It happened that at the time that Judah went down from his brothers and turned aside to a certain Adulamite, whose name was Hirah, Judah saw that this daughter of a certain Canaanite, whose name was Shua, he took her and went into her. Now, do you notice anything wrong here? You're not supposed to marry a Canaanite. So, okay, wait, let's think about this for a second. Here's Judah. Do we know anything significant about Judah, like, let's say, 1,000 years into the story? Like, past this? What's Judah known for? What do we know about Judah? Jesus. He's the lion of the tribe of... I'm sorry, guys. I've lost your enthusiasm. You guys are like 8th graders. I said sex, and your mind is just like, you know... I'm totally kidding. All right, but think about this for a second, okay? So Judah is known for being this great line. They're faithful to Jesus. Only here, Judah is going to be presented as a creep. And let me present him even more as a creep. You ready? Okay, so he took this woman, all right, verse 3, and she conceived and bore a son, and she called his name Man, these are good names. Okay, Sarah, take note. She conceived and bore another son, and she called his name Onan. And yet, again, she bore a son, and she called his name Shelah. Judah was in Chezib when she bore him, okay? Now, Judah took a wife for his firstborn, and her name was Tamar. Oh, maybe some bells are going off because Tamar is significant, okay? But Judah's firstborn, was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death. Oh, man, it's got to be hard to be a dude back then. God just keeps on putting people to death. All right, so verse 8. And Judah said to Onan, notice what he's going to say to him, okay? Go into your brother's wife and perform the duty of a brother-in-law to her and raise up offspring for your brother. What's he telling him to do, in short? Oh, man, I have failed. Okay, let's close in prayer. What is Judah telling his son Onan to do? The Levirate law. Why is he telling him to do that? Thank you. Is it because Onan is particularly needy for companionship? No, it's because Judah is approximating what it means to be faithful. Okay? I hope that's clear. Okay? But Onan, and by the way, you're going to see why I didn't want kids in here in just a second. Okay? Verse 9. But Onan knew that the offspring would not be his. So whenever he went into his brother's wife, he would waste his semen on the ground, so as not to give offspring to his brother. We should close in prayer now. No, verse 10. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and the Lord put him to death also. Okay, just as a side note, okay, I was raised in a tradition that, and I'm not trying to be crass here, would always try to scare the hell out of you. I'm not saying like to say that like in a coarse way. I literally had a youth minister say, if you masturbate, you'll get killed. That's not what's in view here at all. And yes, I just did say that word, and some of you might, officially leave. But listen, we need to have these conversations. By the way, if you don't have these conversations, guess who's going to have them? The world, schools. Like they're gonna talk about it, right? So is what's going on here? Did God get so mad at him for what the Bible says, wasting his semen on the ground? Why is God mad? Hint. He didn't follow the Levirate law. Okay, so listen. And what he did was wicked in the sight of the Lord, and he put him to death. Man, that's 2 brothers down, right? Then Judah said to Tamar, his daughter-in-law, listen, this is in verse 11, remain a widow in your father's house till Shelah, my son, grows up. Is it Shayla? Whatever. Poor guy, he has a bad name. For he feared that he would die, just like his brothers. So Tamar went and remained in her father's house. What's going on here? Judah's a creep. He doesn't care about her. He's a bad dude. Gets worse. Before it gets better, it gets worse. All right, verse 12. In the course of time, the wife of Judah, Shua's daughter, died. When Judah was comforted, he went up to Timnah to his sheep shearers, and he and his friend Hirah the Adullamite. And when Tamar was told, your father-in-law is going up to Timnah to shear his sheep, she took off her widow's garment and covered herself in a veil, wrapping herself up, and sat in the entrance to Enaim, which is on the road of Timnah. For she saw that Shelah was grown up, and she had not been given to him in marriage. In other words, he held him back. He said, no, I'm not going to help you out. When Judah saw her, he thought she was a prostitute, for she had covered her face. He turned to her at the roadside and said, come, let me come in to you, for he did not know that she was his daughter-in-law. Okay, so what's Judah doing here? Shameful. Right? What's he doing here? He's sleeping with what he believes is a prostitute. And she said, well, what will you give me that you may come into me? He answered, I will send you a goat from the flock. Man, this is just getting weirder and weirder, right? Like I promise people goats all the time for very different things, by the way, but I have yet to follow through with that promise. And he said, if you give me a pledge until you send it. And he said, what pledge shall I give you? And she replied, your signet cord and your staff that's in your hand. So she gave them to her, and he went in, and she conceived by him. And then she arose and went away, taking off her veil, and put on the garments of her widowhood. Okay, now we're going to fast forward a little bit. So Judah goes back because he has the goat now. I mean, this guy's a dirtbag, but he wants to follow his pledge a little bit. And he basically asks, where's the prostitute that's here? Where's the cult prostitute specifically? And people say, there's no cult prostitute here. And Judah's like, okay. And then about 3 months later, skip down to verse 24. About 3 months later, Judah was told by the people in the town, Tamar, your daughter-in-law has been immoral. Notice what he does. Moreover, she's pregnant by immorality. And Judah said, bring her out, let her be burned. And as she was being brought out, she sent word to her father-in-law, by the man to whom these belong, I am pregnant. So what does she do there? She dupes the duper. By the way, Judah was the one who came up with the lie to tell his father Israel what happened to Joseph. So what's going on here is a very sophisticated narrative technique. You might think as a reader, if you're reading this holistically, chapter 1 through 50, that nothing bad is ever going to happen to the people who perpetrated such evil against Joseph. But something bad, many bad things did happen to Jacob. Why? Because he lived a life in keeping with his horrible lies. Okay? But it gets even funnier, right? By the man to whom these belong, I'm pregnant. And she says, please identify whose these are, the signet and the cord and the staff. And Judah identified them and said, she's more righteous than I, since I did not give her my son, Shelah. And he did not know her again. In other words, he's like, oh, did I say burn her? I meant learn from her. Totally my mistake, right? This guy is a creep all around. And yet, the reason why I read that was because how is Judah used later on? What's Judah's, what do we know about Judah and what's significant about him? From him is going to come a redeemer. You know who Boaz's great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-great-grandpa was? Judah. Hint. And do you know who Boaz's great-grandson's going to be? Well, no, I'm sorry, great-grandson. Sorry, I spun you a little bit. Jesus is the right answer in almost every church service, but I shouldn't. David. And do you know who David's great-great-great-great? Now you can say it. Jesus. All right, let's turn back to Ruth. Okay, so guys, this is so incredibly significant, okay? So Boaz now says, I'm not going to dishonor you. Not only am I not going to sleep with you, not only am I going to not allow people to think that I've slept with you, right? Because he lets her go before anyone can see what she's done. But he goes and he does the right thing. Now, how you guys doing? Seriously, eyes on me just for a second. I sound like a teacher. Eyes on me. You guys all right? Yeah. Okay, can we finish the book real quick? I can also do it next week. Okay. So some of you guys are going, if you say finish to him, I'm going to kill you afterwards. Okay, but let's finish it, okay? Because this is a narrative that should be read holistically. And so stay with me. Now, Boaz had gone up to the gate. This is verse 1 of chapter 4. And behold, a redeemer of whom Boaz has spoken came by. So Boaz said, turn aside, friend, and sit down here. And he turned aside and he sat down there. And he took 10 men of the elders of the city and said, sit down there. So they sat down. Then he said to the redeemer, notice he's not even named. He's not an important character. Naomi, who has come back from the country of Moab, is selling a parcel of land that belonged to our relative Elimelech. I thought I would tell you of it and say, buy it in the presence of sitting here and in the presence of the elders of my people. If you will redeem it, redeem it. But if you will not, tell me that I may know, for there is no one besides you to redeem it, and I come after you. And he said, I will redeem it. Okay, let's talk about what's going on here very quickly. This is the city walls served as kind of like the civic center. This is like where the town hall, so to speak, would be. The elders of the city would do things around the city, and this is where they were conducting official business. Basically, what Boaz says is, you're closer in terms of the familial relations to redeem to redeem the land. Do you want to redeem the land? Notice this guy says, I'll redeem it. Uh-oh, we have drama. Ruth wanted to be redeemed by Boaz, but now there's another dude who could possibly redeem it, right? And dude is a technical theological word. Verse 5, then Boaz said, the day that you buy the field from the hand of Naomi, you also acquire Ruth the Moabite, the widow of the dead, in order to perpetuate the name of the dead in his inheritance. And then the Redeemer said, I cannot redeem it for myself, lest I impair my own inheritance. Take my right of redemption yourself, for I cannot redeem it. So in other words, he realizes, I have to I have to ruin my reputation with having a Moabite. Never mind, you do it. Now, It says in verse 7, this was the custom in former times in Israel concerning redeeming and exchanging. To confirm a transaction, notice we get this again. Julia, you're leaving at the best part. Okay, you take off the sandal and you give it to another. Sarah, would you like my sandal? No, you don't want that stinky thing. And this was the matter of a testing in Israel. So when the Redeemer said to Boaz, buy it for yourself, he drew off his sandal. Isn't that weird? But he did, okay? Then Boaz said to the elders and all the people, you are witnesses this day that I have bought from the hand of Naomi all that belonged to Elimelech and all that belonged to Chilion and Mahlon. Those are the two sons that she lost. Also, Ruth the Moabite, the widow of Mahlon, I have bought to be my wife, to perpetuate the name of the dead and his inheritance, that all the name of the dead may not be cut off from the brothers and from the gate of this native place. You are witnesses to this day. Then all the people who were at the gate and the elders said, we are witnesses. May the Lord make the woman who is coming into your house like Rachel and Leah, who together put up the house of Israel. May you act worthily in Ephrathah and be renowned in Bethlehem. And may your house be like the house of Perez, whom Tamar bore to Judah, because of the offspring that the Lord will give you by the hand by this young woman. So Boaz took Ruth, and she became his wife, and he went into her, and the Lord gave her conception, and she bore a son. Then the women said to Naomi, blessed be the Lord, who has not left you in the day without a redeemer, and may his name be renowned in Israel, and he shall be the restorer of life and the nourisher of your old age, and for your daughter-in-law who loves you, who is more to you than 7 sons. Notice how intimate that is, who has given birth to him. Then Naomi took the child and laid him on her lap and became his nurse. And the woman of the neighborhood gave him a name, saying, a son has been born to Naomi. And they named his name Obed, which, by the way, there's names that are significant. Obed means servant. Isn't that telling of who David will be? He'll be the servant to Israel. Although he'll lead, he'll be the servant. And ultimately, David's seed, namely Jesus, will be the suffering servant. He was the father of Jesse, the father of David. Now, these are the generations of Perez. Perez fathered Hezron. Hezron fathered Ram. Ram fathered Abinadab. Abinadab fathered Nahshon. Nahshon fathered Salmon, who loved to be cooked with lemons and capers. Salmon fathered Boaz. Boaz fathered Obed. Obed fathered Jesse. And Jesse fathered David. The end. First of all, can we just acknowledge what a cool book? What a weird book in some places, but what a cool book. And I want to just remind you of these important themes as we close. And don't worry, we're going to close. Look at how God is sovereignly moving behind the scenes, even when you least expect it. Even when he seems like he is either asleep or has checked out, God is on the move and he is orchestrating things totally behind the scenes. But I want you to understand, why does it end with a genealogy? I mean, to us, there could be nothing less compelling than a genealogy. But to the ancient world, a genealogy was a record of God's faithfulness. And God saying, you know what? I promised you before. I told you I'd be faithful. I promised you that chesed love and that faithfulness and loyalty. Here is it borne out in the generations. And so as we conclude, you can see here the important themes that we started with and that we'll end with throughout our journey in the book of Ruth. That God provides. There's the providence of God. It's not coincidence. God is at work in your pain and in your pleasure. In the things that you wish you could get rid of like that, and in the things that you wish you could hold on to forever. God is at work in all those things. And the character of God, remember, we are introduced to a foundational concept in chapter 2 where Naomi says, but the Shaddai, right? That El Shaddai, or that Shaddai there, means that God is the one who's the nourishing mountain. He can turn brokenness into blessing. Never forget that. If you're suffering, the answer isn't, hey, you shouldn't suffer. The answer is you should mourn, but not as those who have no hope, because God can change that. And it might not be on this side of heaven, but he can and he will change that. We saw the love of neighbor and the generosity overflowing from someone like Boaz. And finally, we saw the importance of family. That family was the way through which God would redeem all people. He told Abraham that it was through his line and through his family that all people would be redeemed. And what we have here is a surrogate family. This is what I want to end on. That if we show love, selfless, and love that costs us to each other, we will be, as the book of Leviticus and Deuteronomy and later on in 1 Peter says, we will be a peculiar people. And by peculiar people, it means that people will ask questions like, why do you do that? Why do you have such love for one another? Because God has such love for us. And we're recipients. Whatever we receive, we freely give. And it's in that celebratory note that we close, and we're going to sing this one final song of reflection. Lord, thank you for this day. Thank you for the book of Ruth, showing your character, your providence, that your love for us is abounding with grace and kindness. Would we not only be recipients of that, but would we be purveyors of that? People who give it away. We're blessed to be a blessing. We're a conduit of that blessing. Lord, help us to give it first and foremost to the family of God, but also to those on the outside, to shower them with love, even if they're enemies, to shower them with love, with grace, forgiveness, mercy, all the things you've been given us. So, Lord, would we sing your praises now as we reflect on your glory? In Jesus' name, amen.